Today, I'm joined by Blake Powers, who many of you will recognize. His Instagram handle is Bond Life Chicago. Hiya, Blake. You all right?
Hi, David. How are you doing today? Thanks for having me on.
No, it's really my pleasure. I know we've been talking a lot for a while, actually, over messengers, whatever the kids call it these days. Instagram Messenger, that's it. I always said MSN Messenger then, which would have been showing my age. And
Yep.
yeah, and we've also been communicating via email because you've written some really nice stuff for the 007GB, the British James Bond fan club website, for which you're a
Thank you.
member.
Thank you.
So it's been my pleasure to edit your pieces to get them online. Your pieces never require much editing. You're such a great writer at putting across your ideas, and I know
Thank you.
we're going to be talking about one of your pieces in particular today, because we're talking about mental health, and it's something that I don't think gets written about very much, if I'm honest.
Right.
In the James Bond community. There are a few other people who've written about it, but you can probably count the number of particularly men who've written about mental health in the sphere of James
Right.
Bond, probably on just a pair of hands, if that. I was really excited when you said that you'd feel comfortable talking about some of the stuff you've previously written about on a video and podcast, because I think it's a really important conversation to have. Do you? I take it you think the same?
Yes, definitely. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, off camera. But it's something that, whether it's just the men or even just in general, it's become more common to be comfortable in talking about it. And I think that that's kind of made it even more important to kind of bring it to the forefront for maybe to help more people become more comfortable with it as well.
No, that's absolutely great. And it's worth saying as well, if you're watching the video version of this, Blake's got a busy life like me, so he's actually fitting this chat while waiting for a train. Is that right? If you wonder why he sat there in a car.
Yep, we are on scene right now. We are in my car in the parking lot, and then something is, we might as well touch on it now too. At some point while we're talking, I might look like I'm looking at a squirrel or something since I'm here in the parking lot, and that's just going to be my what's coming up is hypervigilance, and basically it's just kind of being aware of your surroundings at that point. So that's I'll still be paying attention, and it's just going to be kind of me just looking around what's going on, kind of thing.
Wow. No, so right now, am I right in saying you are hyper vigilant? You're on the lookout for what? So obviously, I've read your article, and if you haven't read Blake's
Yep.
article, make sure there's a link to Blake's original article about hypervigilance when I put this out, because it's a really, really great piece. But could you just explain to us what we mean by hypervigilance? It's something I have touched on in one article in particular I've written, but it
Hmm.
wasn't until I read your article that it really clicked into place how it connects with James Bond. So go for it.
Yep.
Talk to us about hypervigilance.
So the best way I can describe hypervigilance is ultimately you're everybody has a different sense of kind of awareness and kind of just being alert or on the lookout kind of thing. And hypervigilance is when you are on the higher end of that scale, kind of like the code red type deal for an extended period of time. Ultimately, hyper meaning, you know, high up or extreme, and then just your vigilance of being aware of your surroundings. And where it comes up a lot in my life and in my work is as a police officer, basically my entire work shift, I have to be hyper vigilant. James Bond has to be hyper vigilant whenever he's on a mission. However, when he's just in London, and my article, and I think we plan on talking about it a little bit. When he's not on a mission, he's not as hyper vigilant, and it allows his body to kind of de-escalate a little bit. Whereas similar to how James Bond would be and myself, even when I'm not working and I come down from that extreme hypervigilance, there's my normal is still probably a little bit higher than other people's normal, just because of how how alert I have to be on a regular basis. So when I do come down, it's not as low as other people potentially.
So from my, and please correct any of my misunderstandings here, Blake, but my understanding of hypervigilance when I looked into it, because I've had a lot of battles with anxiety, particularly
Mm-hmm.
in recent years, but throughout my life, to be honest. And it wasn't until fairly recently when I started really reading up about the science behind what was going on in my brain when I get into an anxious state or I have panic attacks and things
Right.
like that. That I understood really that much about the fight or flight response. So that kind of evolutionary mechanism we all have to kind of steer us clear of danger and help us spring into action. Our heart starts racing, getting more oxygen to all of our organs, our brain, so we can think faster and all of that kind of thing.
Yep.
So is that the same with you with hypervigilance? Do you have a much more heightened fight or flight response?
I think that's exact, and in a more scientific manner, I think you basically just gave a definition of hypervigilance as well, David, where it's basically it is you're you're basically in a state of survival for
Mm,
that extended period of time, whether it is fighting or, flight type deal to get away. And that's where you're in this heightened state for an extended period of time. And then the dangers of it and we've all felt it. We just might not have known that we felt it. And
mm,
why I wrote my article was because I've read all the Fleming novels and
mm.
then the majority of the continuation Bond novels. And personally, I really made a connection with the way that all the authors did a good job of, sorry, I talk with my hands a lot.
Like me.
The,
You just can't
yep,
see mine. Mine are going like mad.
the way that Bond is when he's not on a mission towards the beginning of each storyline, where he's a little bit depressed or he's drinking a little bit more or he has to drive his car really fast in order to kind of enjoy his day type stuff, or the womanizing aspect of
Mhm.
it, where when you're used to that heightened fight or flight, you like you said, you're getting a lot more oxygen, you feel more alive. It
Mm,
kind of is a little bit more of like that adrenaline junkie type deal. When you're not at that state, sometimes you feel depressed. Sometimes you feel so tired you can't do anything else, and you just want to sit on the couch, watch TV, or sleep, or do whatever. Or what a lot of people do, and similar to kind of one of Bond's crutches is he falls onto a lot of alcohol and stuff like that,
mhm.
unhealthy ways to try to numb that basement feeling from the hypervigilance, and that's kind of where it really ties into the mental health aspect.
I love in your article how you do choose some really salient examples of where, say, Bond is in the office, he's always staggeringly bored by paperwork, isn't he? He's always after an
Yep.
excuse to get out of doing that side of things. And also, it's always grey and rainy in London. So there's some kind of classic
Yep.
fallacy going on from Fleming there. He wants to escape somewhere exotic.
Right.
I wrote about hypervigilance when I did my extended piece about quantum of solace. And I tried
Mm-hmm.
to kind of I tried to sell the idea that the kind of slightly on edge editing of that film is sort of a representation of Bond's mental state in that and his hypervigilance. I'm not sure that was the intention of the filmmakers, if I'm honest. But for me, that's how that film works. And it's really interesting as well, because that's one of the few Bond films where it ever rains and you see a grey, rainy London. So I'm almost
Yeah.
like, was that an intentional callback to Fleming and Bond's depressed mindset when he has to go back to the office? So is that ever a thought that you've had about Quantum of Solace? Do you kind of connect with that film on that way, or am I just making stuff?
I've that detailed, no, but as you were talking through it, I could see every bit of it.
Mm,
And definitely in the aspects of how the way it ends with well, I'm saying, now you've learned your lesson not to trust
mm,
anybody.
mm,
And it's kind of the way that Casino Royale ended to all of Quantum of Solace is he was he is in that that hyper vigilance, that extended state of fight or flight, because he's like, well, I let my guard down the first time. I'll be damned if I let that happen again. And he finishes out what ends up being
mm,
this next mission. And I like I said, I never made that connection, but as you were talking through it, it's like crystal clear in my head that it's like, yeah, that definitely is him almost trying to make up for how he did let his guard down and wasn't vigilant enough in Casino Royale.
So what motivated you to actually write your piece? What because it's such a well thought through piece. It's not something you just dashed off. I imagine you put a lot of thought and time into how to convey quite challenging subject matter, actually, because we are talking not just about hypervigilance, but as you say, the come down from that, almost, that the depressive state that Bond frequently goes into, and I can certainly relate to, and from what you've said, you relate to as well. So why did you want to write about that?
So I've kind of thought about it for a long time, several years, even just reading the first couple Fleming novels and kind of getting that aspect of it. And honestly, it was just one of those things where I finally had the courage to try to start putting, pen to paper, so to speak, because it is something that means a lot to me. Again, being in law enforcement, I've worked, maybe I shouldn't say it, I've worked a 20-hour shift before. Wow. And, sure, I get exhausted in those 20 hours, but I'm still 100% awake at the end of those 20 hours, and I still can do my job. The second that I'm on my drive home, I've changed. I'm in my personal car and I'm driving home, and and it's just, I've been so high up here for so long that my body's like, okay, you're safe. And all of a sudden it's just like, we need rest. And it's just, battling to keep my eyes awake just to drive home. And again, with the way that I felt, one, I wanted to make sure that it was, clear how good that the authors were actually doing of depicting this, even though they were never coming out directly and saying it. They were doing a really good job of kind of making that a real thing, a reality. And again, it meaning so much to me, I thought that it was just a good idea to kind of put something together of just something that a lot of people, and you don't have to be in law enforcement to deal with it. Like you said, you yourself have gone through kind of similar things, and all it has to do is your body just has to be in a heightened sense of awareness or fight or flight. And then when you come down from that, you need to be able to know how to kind of pick yourself up in healthy ways, so that you're ultimately, so that you can live a long, healthy life, versus falling on to unhealthy habits or just getting sedative and just sitting on the couch and being a couch potato type thing.
We'll get onto the coping strategies in a minute, because although neither of us are trained psychologists, I think it'd be quite helpful to people listening or watching to kind of hear how we've sort of had to go at tackling our issues with this. I mean, my closest experience, I don't routinely do a 20-hour shift. And hopefully that's not kind of every single day for you as well, because obviously really
it's not regular.
But I have done days that are 20 hours long occasionally, probably most of all during the first waves of the COVID pandemic, when I was constantly having to, in the UK, teachers, school leaders, were expected to do the contact tracing, so figure out who the children might have infected, and then call those children. I remember being up till about 2 o'clock in the morning one day and thinking, I can't do this much longer. And actually, I started doing all my James Bond stuff online at that point as a coping strategy, because I needed something to take my mind off. Because in those moments, and what you said just clicked in my head completely, because it wasn't actually, when I was doing those things, I was full of energy. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was phoning parents, phoning kids, reassuring them. In those moments, I was absolutely fine. But then it was when I actually tried to switch off that I was actually incapable of doing it. And so the only thing I could do was switch my brain on to doing something that took my mind off it. So I I started doing all this writing, and 250,000+ words later, I'm still doing all of this stuff. So in a sense, it was kind of a positive, but and it might not have ever actually happened if I hadn't been in that mental state. But I'm still not sure that was probably the healthiest way to do it. Maybe kind of more exercise would have probably helped. I know that's something you've talked about before. That's right. You do for anyone who's seen your Instagram knows you do a lot of exercise. Is that your main coping strategy?
I would say that would be one of them. Myself as well. The bond stuff is definitely part of it, and what I would say for that is, and I think you do a good job of it as well, where it can't be the only thing that you do also, because then you get too much into it, and it can't be a job, because it's got to continue to be fun.
Yeah.
If it's not fun, then you're gonna lull yourself into even more of the same thing. So that's what I would say, but definitely fitness. And this is where the bond community, but kind of outside of just being bond and social media in general, is just have friends and people to talk to that you're close with outside of your work. Because even in your work, and I don't know how it is with the education system, but in law enforcement, if you surround yourself only with people in law enforcement, and you go out and you hang out, whether you're going bowling or out for drinks or even a kid's party, all you end up talking about is basically, war stories. And you just, and that, again, you kind of fall back into the same routine. So I would imagine the same thing if you're only with people that are in the same profession or that you work with, you're really still just at work, even when you're off work, talking with them. And so what the bond communities really offer me is getting to meet and talk to people that I otherwise never would have gone and talked to. And, now getting to have friends across the ocean that I never would have probably reached out to otherwise. And that's helped. But, that, and then just always making sure, even when I'm a little bit exhausted after work, I've got a 7-year-old son. If he wants to play with me, I go and I do that, because, a body in motion always stays in motion. A body not in motion is a lot more energy to try to keep it going. And not even from a workout standpoint, but just not getting used to just, vegging out and doing absolutely nothing. Because if that becomes my everyday routine every time I get home, the one day that I might have had energy because it was an easy day, I'm just going to go home and want to do nothing. And so, trying to go out and plan things on your off days when you can, having that work-life balance and things like that. And then, like you said, for me, I try to exercise at least once a day. And that's for multiple things. It's for my mental health and it's for my physical health. And my girlfriend does a really good job of supporting me for that and allowing me the time to do that, because it's also it helps me and my stress level at work, because I feel slightly more capable to handle myself if I ever needed to do something at work, versus being out of shape, not being able to, defend myself and then getting hurt at work, because then that's going to just, double down on all the negative aspects of it.
Everything you've just said really resonates, especially what you were saying about the body in motion. I always used to kind of think, am I abnormal because I can't switch off just by sitting and watching the TV, doing nothing. I'm actually incapable of doing that. I have to use my brain or my body for something. And because otherwise my mind just whirs and all the rest of that. I think Bond is actually quite a bad role model in some regards with this. In your article, you write about particularly the epic hangover he has at the start of Thunderball, Fleming's Thunderball, and he realizes that he's got to, something's got to change, and M sends him off to shrublands, doesn't he? So Bond fills time between assignments with, let's be honest, quite a lot of, you said, gambling and all the rest of it. But which may keep your brain active. I've never been much of a gambler, I'm not sure, but he certainly spends it by drinking an awful lot, which is, I suppose, quite an easy thing to fall into if we're not careful.
Right.
So, anyone who follows the latest screen Instagram knows I like cocktails and things like that. But it's when those things start not being fun anymore that I suppose we have to be really mindful, don't we?
Yeah, when they become something where, and I've worked with people where they need to have one drink of whiskey to go to sleep.
Right.
Like that's not okay,
No.
and that's, you can enjoy your drink, you can enjoy, I don't suggest it, but you can enjoy, smoking or whatever, but it needs to be in healthy,
Mm,
amounts or at healthy times and things like that. Like you said, you can enjoy it, but when it becomes not fun or a need,
mm.
then that's something where it becomes a little bit more dangerous, and it's not so much of a healthy, habit anymore.
Yeah. So in some ways, Bond is a relatable figure, but maybe not a role model as regards maintaining mental health. Yeah.
I would agree with that. Is maybe his coping methods aren't necessarily the best coping methods, but otherwise he's a pretty cool person to try to emulate or look up to in some fashion.
Yeah, I agree.